Hello. Okay, hi. So we're gonna go ahead and basically just jump right into it. I'm gonna do a quick grounding before we get started. So I'm gonna invite you to take a minute. Maybe, you're doing some emails or making some breakfast or doing some childcare, some other things this morning. And so as folks are trickling in, just want us to take a second and ground and enter this space. So right now, if you feel comfortable, if you're able, feel free to close your eyes. You could plant your feet on the ground. And I'm just going to take a few deep breaths here together. Really just at your own pace and just taking the second to, moment to really transition and enter into this workshop. If you want and you're able, I invite you to do a quick body scan. So you could start at the top of your head. Very top of your head, notice if there are any sensations, any pressure, any weight that you're carrying. And just without any judgment, just notice it, give it some attention. You could slowly make your way down. You could feel any sensations on your face, and your neck, and your shoulders. If you want, we hold a lot of tension in our shoulders. You can see if you could relax them just a little bit more. Notice your arms and the palms of your hand. Similarly, we hold a lot of energy in the palms of our hands. Just notice what's coming up for you right now as we transition. Maybe in your stomach, maybe you're feeling anxious or have some tightness, or maybe you're feeling more relaxed and grounded. Notice your knees, your legs, your toes. Oftentimes we forget our toes, our feet. Gotta love on our feet. Appreciate them for holding us up through the day. Anywhere else you might be holding some tension right now or anxiety, just see if you could relax a little bit deeper into your body and take a few deep breaths. And with that, at your own pace, whenever you feel ready, absolutely no rush. Feel free to just open your eyes and kind of come back into this Zoom land, wherever we are today in this time and space. Beautiful, thank you all. So we're gonna get started just with a few introductions. So I'm gonna share a little bit, and then Sarah's gonna share a little bit about NCLT and some of her work there as well. So I just recently started, my name is Sima. I think I've see some familiar faces or names, but I just started with NCLT a little while ago, a few months ago, and I'm working as a resident advocate and community mediator. And I came into this work, I was formerly trained as a mediator and restorative justice facilitator with SEEDS and the HIMSA Collective. And what could I say about that? I'm really passionate about transformative justice. A lot of my experience with facilitating came from doing programming in the prisons. And so I feel really passionate about, in particular, the school to prison pipeline, and also just transformative justice and how we could work to change conflict on personal, interpersonal, and systemic levels in our communities, especially right now in this moment with COVID, and as we're working to defund the police and thinking about alternatives to violence. I believe that mediation and de-escalation is a really necessary and critical tool. And on a personal note, I also do live in a collectively owned low equity co-op in the Bay Area in Berkeley. So I use these tools often on a daily basis, and it's one of those things that, it really is a practice. A lot of times folks will come to a de-escalation workshop and they want really tangible and concrete skills about what they could do to navigate conflict. And I'm gonna, go over some of that stuff. But I want to be really transparent and clear with folks that it really is a practice. It's like a martial art or like anything else that, it's not effective unless we're able to really practice and utilize it in our lives. So We're going to do some experiential learning today also, along with some more, concrete frameworks and tools. And if any time y'all have any questions or you need to take a break or anything comes up, feel free to just drop a line in the chat and we'll, we want to make this interactive and definitely be responsive to people's needs. So please be in communication. So with that, I'm going to actually I'm going to let pass it on to Sarah to introduce herself. And if you all, while we're doing that, if you want to just take a second and even check in with yourselves and really think about, what is it that brought you to this workshop today? What is it you're hoping to get out of it? And feel free to share in the chat with everyone or just check in with yourself about what is it that's motivating and calling you to this work. So so take a second to do that. And then Sarah, whenever you're ready, pass it off to you.
So real briefly, while you all are deciding what your intentions are and what you want to share in the chat, my name is Sarah Scruggs, the Stewardship and Education Coordinator at Northern California Land Trust. And today I'll be supporting Sima with making sure Zoom runs as smoothly as possible. I'm also really, really passionate about this particular topic. Just thinking personally, the amount of anxiety that I've felt over the last few months because of the pandemic and several different things, just recognizing that even I can be on edge in ways that I didn't expect, and trying to figure out how to, inhabit my body and be mindful of the interactions that I'm having with other people. And then I also actually have a background in conflict resolution and nonviolent resistance work that I mainly practiced on a professional level in the occupied West Bank. So I bring that experience with me to this work, and often the stuff that can happen in a military occupied zone, like it's much more dramatic, but the dynamics and the things to think about as far as context of violence and being aware of where you are and where other people are very similar. So I'm excited to support Sima in walking all of us through that practice and work today.
Thank you. So we're going to do a quick workshop overview. And I'm just seeing, so I'm hearing folks mentioning they're interested in learning how to foster stronger connections and collaboration. So hopefully this workshop will offer a little bit of all of that. So before we go over the overview of kind of, some of the main topics we're going to cover, I do want to do a quick land acknowledgement. And actually, Sarah, did you want to talk about CCOI?
Sure, real briefly. Sorry, I was introducing myself and forgot about the program, which I'm also excited about. So the Community Co-Ownership Initiative started as a partnership between the People of Color Sustainable Housing Network here in the Bay Area and the Northern California Land Trust, and just seeking to try to find ways to diversify and expand access to shared ownership and democratically resident controlled housing, build a space where people can build relationships and share resources and knowledge and skills, and which we're finding better ways to do on the Zoom platform. It was hard at first, but I think we're getting into a groove now. And then centering Black, Indigenous, and other people of color and low-income people-led housing and land projects. So that's the basis of the program. And this is one workshop of the Community Co-Ownership Initiative. We've got another one coming up that's focused on finance and acquisition and rehab development processes. So for people that are looking at buying their buildings or partnering with somebody to buy their buildings, we'll have a workshop on that in December. And then more stuff to come in the new year. But today's workshop, excited to be really interactive and present with you all here.
Awesome, thank you. So I just wanted to, before we get started, do a land acknowledgement and just take a moment and really name and recognize that we are residing on unceded Ohlone territory, and acknowledging kind of the history of colonialism on this land and the fact that, there were and also presently are Indigenous folks that are on this land, of which we reside. And wanted to introduce, Segura Land Trust, and just actually quick, show of hands. Are folks familiar with Segurite Land Trust? Has anyone heard of them before? I see a hand too. Okay, cool. Yeah. So it's an urban indigenous women-led land trust, and you can check out their websites there at the bottom. But it was basically spearheaded by Karina Gold, who is an indigenous activist. And they kind of their main premise, they work to facilitate indigenous land to indigenous people through practices of rematriation, cultural revitalization, and land restoration. And so what that means is they're really like working to heal legacies of colonialism, genocide, and patriarchy. And I love the way she frames it, to do the work our ancestors and future generations are calling us to do. So it's a really interesting project and land trust. And if you want to check it out, you can definitely check out their website. And one of the really interesting things that I appreciate about them is they do have a place on their website where you can contribute a voluntary land tax. So if you want to contribute and, directly to an indigenous fund for being on this land, you're welcome to do that to help kind of reallocate resources in a really intentional way. So I just wanted, it wouldn't be right for us to do a workshop around de-escalation without naming the fact that we are on colonized land. So this workshop isn't going to focus necessarily on those practices, but just wanted to, just name that before we move forward. So with that, this workshop in particular, we want to acknowledge the context that we're working within, but this workshop in particular, mainly going to be focusing on exploring our conditioning around conflict, of which there's a lot, and identifying roadblocks to effective communication, an overview of holding space for ourselves and others, and finding our stretch zones. So before we move on, I just wanted to share that a lot of the tools and a lot of stuff we're going to go over today, it really is pretty basic stuff. I mean, in the sense that it's things that we learned in kindergarten that, it's such an innate part of who we are and our just DNA as human beings. And a lot of times it's amazing when adults are in conflict. I look at the babies and kids and, toddlers in the room, and they're just always so peaceful and looking at the adults and really confused around what's going on. And I say that to share that we know how to do this work. We know how to get along with each other. We know how to be in right relationship with each other. But it takes that practice. And so it's really, this work is just going to be about kind of reclaiming what's already innate, an inherent part of our humanity, but remembering to kind of go back to these tools and remembering that, there's a lot of conditioning that we are unlearning and unpacking in every moment. So if there's any, I was just going to say, if there's any, questions about that in particular or anything that comes up, feel free to drop a message in the chat and we could address it.
And one note for folks, we are taping today's workshop, but when you're broken into pairs, that particular stuff won't be shared and won't be taped. So just wanted to give that caveat here.
Thank you. So one of the things, so we are, we know how to be in right relationship. And then the question is, well, why does it seem like there's always so much conflict around, maybe in our personal lives or just in the news or in our world at large? And so much of that has to do with our social conditioning. And we are actually today, we are at day 247 of what my meditation teacher calls Shelter in Kindness Retreat. And I really appreciate the way it feels important to name that it's been that long so that we're, tracking time. And also, I really appreciate the way that she frames that as shelter in kindness, because even though these times could feel really rough in quarantine, it's important to recognize that our responses to conflict and our responses to this moment is really going to define kind of how we navigate and move through all this stuff that we're experiencing. So I want to just take a second and talk about some of our conditioning around conflict. And I want to give you all a moment to really think about what are your personal earliest experiences of conflict? Something that you feel comfortable sharing with other participants. So nothing like, too traumatic, but just, maybe is bullying in elementary school or whatever it is. Just take a second and think about what is a conflict that you remember as a child that really stood out to you. And think about in as much detail as you can, what happened, how did it make you feel, what do you remember, were there any particular images, smells, sounds? And then when you're thinking about it, also think about how was it handled? And then, you know, with that, what messages did you receive about how the conflict was handled? So we're going to give you all a second. We're going to break folks out into different individual breakout groups, and just take a moment and go in a little bit and just really, yeah, take 5 minutes to just think about it and sit with it. And so we'll come back in a little bit, but just think about earliest experience of conflict that you feel comfortable sharing out with the whole group. Okay, so thank you all for taking that moment to check in. And if you feel like you're still, in reflective mode, take a second to just wrap up, but we are going to come back to whole group. And just want to hear from folks, if anyone wants to volunteer, really to share out what was that experience like, just to think about your earliest memory of conflict. Was there something that came to mind pretty quickly, or did it take some time to think about it? Or just what was that experience of going back to that? Yeah, Philip.
Okay, so when I was 12 years old, I got my dad got me a job working, a volunteer job working for the Head Start program. And what it turned out my job was to hit the kids, like these preschool kids, if they didn't behave in class. And if any, they had these young idealistic teachers, and if they were having any problems, they would call for me to come and hit the kids.
Wow.
And the kind of the message that I got from that was that, if you're bigger, you can, discipline young children. And that it seemed like, that, I don't know if that was early in the Head Start program, but they were really struggling at this school to figure out how to get 4-year-olds to behave in class.
And what was that? Yeah, what did that feel like for you to reflect on that experience?
Oh, pretty horrible.
And you said, how old were you again?
12.
12. So that's amazing. Throughout the years, right? All of that stuck with you since 12 years old. And so thinking about, just how something like it could have been a really simple thing with good intentions of wanting to support as a teacher's aide could have been a really impactful experience that maybe we weren't aware of at the time. And thinking about, I heard you say that your takeaway from that was that if you're bigger, that you could hurt people. And so how that kind of, what that mentality kind of might do moving forward in terms of engaging with other folks in conflict.
Yes, the interesting thing is that they offered me a paid job to come back the next year to do the same thing, and I've turned it down.
You did? Okay, so you learned, so you took that experience and were able to kind of apply it in different ways, hopefully, to decide that it's not something that you wanted to do.
Yes.
So it's a good, it sounds like it was a good learning opportunity. And so I'm curious, so for other folks as well, like what was that experience like going back to that early memory? What did that do? What did that feel like in your body? Was it hard to kind of, did it feel like a really vivid memory, or did it feel like really far away, or was it hard to conjure that experience, or what was it like to call on that?
If I could share.
Yeah, please.
For me, it wasn't necessarily hard to recall because it's a memory that I keep in somewhere near the front of my head. And thinking through it, I think it informs a lot of how I continue to behave. So it's like, and it's funny that I recall it so easily. Being that I had to have been like 7 or 8, somewhere around there. I couldn't have been too much older than that. I grew up in a small town in South Carolina, and so when we would get a new store, it was like people took off work when we got a second Walmart. So when we would get a new store, it was like a thing. Oh, there's a new store. And this new kind of variety store type place opened up in the strip with the grocery store that we used to go to most often. And I remember going there and browsing, and I was probably with my aunt, and there were some other kids also in the store as well. The store owner was an older white guy. Myself and my aunt and the other kids in the store who we didn't know were Black. And so browsing around the store, I was just kind of not paying attention to what was going on around me. And I was like, oh, I like this. They have neat stuff. But my aunt mentioned to my grandfather, once we got home, we're talking about it, that the proprietor of the store was following the kids around who were in the store, and he was rude to them. And I hadn't noticed that interaction, but she had. And so maybe a couple of weeks later, I went to the grocery store with my grandfather, and he popped into that store. And I went inside with him, and he struck up a conversation with the store owner. And they introduced themselves, and the store owner kept calling my grandfather. He called him Joe, which is not my grandfather's name. My grandfather's name is Fred. And so my grandfather, in the next volley of conversation, called him a completely different first name than what his first name was. And so I'm sitting there near a shelf, and I'm watching them, and I'm thinking they're playing a game. It's like tickles me, because every time the man calls my grandfather some completely different name, and just as even as you please, the level of conversation it was tension. What I later came to recognize as tension. But they just volleyed like that. And my grandfather just, they had their conversation, and he didn't buy anything, but we left. And when we got in the car, my grandfather said, "Don't ever go into that store again. That's not a place you need to ever go." And that's when he explained the history of it's to call Black men out of their names as a form of disrespect. And my grandfather was challenging that and answering that with the same energy. And that is how I move in life to this day. There's so much stuff in that interaction of like, he was going to go to this place and check it out and assess it, because he knew that was a place that I go to that grocery store all the time. So that was probably a little store that I would be running into all the time, without it even being a direct thing. He assessed the situation, figured out what was going on here. Is this a place I even need to be? And challenge the person doing the thing to let him know this wasn't acceptable, all at one time, without anybody raising their voice or getting into a fight or anything like that. And so it taught me, like, you have the right to disengage with certain spaces. You have the right to not allow yourself to be in certain spaces if they're not for you. This is how you can assess if a situation is for you, without it, just all these different things. And so that it informs so much about how that interaction just informs so much about me.
That's such I really thank you for sharing that with us, and being willing to share that with us. And there's so much there, and it's so interesting how it seems like, that whole experience was like just under the surface. Like, you didn't have to, and I don't know if you and your the adult you're with, if y'all ever had a conversation about it, or if this was something like you just gleaned on your own, right? You had all of that information, you had this huge life lesson, all these learning, and it was just under the surface. Maybe it was never even spoken about, but there was so much content and richness there. And it's actually a really good segue, because we really want to kind of explore like how much conflict has history, right? And it's not, sometimes a lot of times what we think of as conflict is rooted in something so much deeper. And so Yeah, actually, I think that's a perfect segue. Thank you for that. We're going to talk about the just importance of knowing ourselves in this work and knowing our own kind of histories and backgrounds. And so when we think about, thank you. So when we think about as conflict, yeah, it's usually a visual symptom of something that's a much deeper belief system or structure of injustice. And so there's this really great visual that I'm familiar with. And oh, actually, yeah, so I'm going to rewind. So just to give another like more concrete example, I was thinking when I was doing this workshop of, yeah, what would be an example of like a really great visual? So thinking about, are you all, just show of hands really quickly, how many folks in this group are familiar with barbecue Becky? So most of us, right? Okay, so she became pretty famous pretty quickly for calling the police on folks that she saw barbecuing around Lake Merritt in Oakland. And she saw folks barbecuing and she's really upset because she thought it was illegal. And so she called the cops and it became a meme and caught national attention. And folks were really frustrated by this whole situation of a woman who was calling cops on folks who were having a good time to, yeah, try to, you know, intervene in the situation. But the thing that's so interesting about her call is that there was so much context. Like she felt really indignant about what was happening, and yet there was so much context that she was missing around what was actually happening under the surface. And so if you think about, so another really great visual that I like to use is an oppression tree. And kind of think about it, whenever I think about conflict, think about it as a tree. I like using trees as symbols for lots of things because it helps just ground me personally. But this is a really helpful tool that I've come across. And so you really think about conflict. What are some, so even, yeah, when you just like hear the word conflict, right? Like what are some things that come to mind? Just popcorn style, really quick, like some words. So what are some, yeah, like some examples of conflict that we see in the news or media or that we experience on a pretty regular basis in our personal lives?
Danger.
Danger, okay, great. What else? Danger.
Yelling.
Yelling, yep, okay, what else?
Misunderstanding.
Misunderstanding, frustration, right? Maybe people shut down, maybe, yeah, right? So all these things, so these are examples of what we consider conflict. And when we look at kind of the top of the tree, kind of the point we want to get home is that, let's see, we're going to see if we could zoom in here a little bit. I know the visual is a little bit hard to, oh, perfect, thank you. Sarah's on it. So yeah, think about yelling, think about maybe frustration, think about screaming, hitting, right? All these things. And when we think about actually where they come from, right? Where these things are rooted in, it starts to make sense. So there's some examples here of, right, food insecurity, deforestation, European standards of beauty, right? Low self-esteem, insecurity in young girls, greenwashing, fat phobia, fat shaming, all these things. And we think, yeah, like that's really frustrating. It makes me want to scream. It makes me want to like hit and yell and do all this and act out. And when we go a little bit deeper and really unpack it, it's often, you know, the social conflicts, right? All the calls, all the complaints. It comes from somewhere. And so we think about our social conditioning and where we are been taught these things. And oftentimes it's rooted in deeper experiences of oppression. And so if we go, so these are just like the branches, right? If we start to go a little bit deeper, we notice there is the sexism. And then if we go a little bit deeper, right? Well, where does that come from? Maybe it's rooted in a culture of militarization and cisgendered patriarchy, and then I think about corporations and how corporate culture could be really violent in allowing sexism, right? And then we think, okay, well that sucks as well. But we go a little bit deeper, right? And we think about, well, where does that come from? And we think about, you know, some of our, maybe there's poor media channels, maybe there's misrepresentation of people's truths. Maybe there's homophobia, right? Maybe there's government policies and systems and places that create these corporations. Maybe there is the prison industrial complex, right? That led to somebody not having access to a job that didn't allow them to get the food, that maybe put them in a precarious situation, that maybe got them on the street in the first place, that maybe got them, you know, to a place where they were screaming out for help. And maybe that's rooted in a lack of education. Maybe that's rooted in patriarchy or capitalism or colonialism. And again, going back to this idea of being on stolen indigenous land. And what does that mean? If we say Black Lives Matter on stolen indigenous land, what is the impact of that, right? Like, what does that actually mean at the end of the day? And so I kind of wanted to just go over this visual with folks to share that majority of the time in our, you know, day-to-day experiences, for most of us, right, when we're trying to like get through our days, we're kind of doing the practical stuff of just dealing with the social conflicts, and we're very much kind of at the top of the tree, kind of working with the branches and working with what's in front of us. And so it takes a lot of work to like really go in and like come back to center and dig in and contextualize and think about, okay, like where are we? Like what is our social orientation in this moment? And every moment, super dynamic, right? But like what is the history of this conflict? What is the history of this moment, of this interaction, of this relationship? And so the more that we're able to put it into context, like giving the example of Barbecue Becky, right? So if she's thinking about folks barbecuing at the lake, why are they at the lake? You know, what does it mean? What are the implications of folks claiming public space on indigenous land? What does it mean to be in a gentrified city on indigenous land? So it kind of, when we start asking those deeper questions and unpacking some of these pieces a little bit, it opens up space for us to actually engage in the dialogue that needs to take place to be able to transform and move through conflict in healthier and really more sustainable ways. So I'm just gonna pause there and take a second and see if anyone had, just going back to the oppression tree, if anybody had any questions about, about this visual before we move on.
I had a question, but, and I don't know if y'all can, oh, my video's not on. I'm fine if this needs to be background because it may be a deep, it may require some full discussion, but I've been currently struggling with, thank you, Danny, for lifting up your experience, because that connects with, to me, with what you just mentioned, Sima, with the oppression tree. So Barbecue Becky, for instance, one response to that would be, okay, you see me a certain way, I'm gonna put boundaries down because you don't seem to, you know, respect who I am and my rights. Another response, and that's totally valid and justified. Another response is, there's a disconnection. I wanna work towards seeing if there's a way I can get some understanding and possibly, who knows, maybe even a relationship to where, you know, that person, the Barbecue Becky persona realizes this, the humanity in you in that discussion, and goes on and doesn't replicate that again. Again, both are valid, but I guess where I struggle is, I personally like the second approach. But I've noticed that, you know, words that as a left progressive, I've noticed that there's certain words that we use that can kind of prevent that from happening. And that, again, we could say, these are our words, this is our way of claiming sovereignty of ourselves and empowering ourselves. But then I'm trying to find, if I'm trying to reach out to people and do my transformative justice work through reaching out to others who may not connect. And I notice that such words are hindering that connection. I'm struggling with that. Like, how do I respect myself and my racial justice work or social justice work, but then notice that, you know, these words, this language hinders possible connection, and even a way of orienting, you know, discussions can hinder it. Like you hear all the time, PC policing or virtual signaling, and to me that's a messaging issue. If our goal is to make connections outside of our affinity groups or what have you, so I guess it's a personal thing of what matters most to you, but as a trained mediator as well, like I'm trying to just balance that all, and it's difficult. So I would love to hear anyone's thoughts on that.
I appreciate, yeah, I want to, create space if anyone wants to jump in, but I'll just respond to that as well to share that, I think that that's such a great question and such a great kind of like point of reflection. And I hear you grappling, and I think that you did kind of, speak to ways that you do want to address that as well for yourself, and just doing that bridging work and just finding, like, striking that balance, like knowing that boundaries are valid and also still seeking connection. I think that so much of this work of de-escalation and mediation is being able to really just hold complexity and recognizing that there are multiple truths. And the more we could just expand that awareness, the more it allows us to just come back to center and just be, fully present with our true humanity, the ways that children just do so naturally. That's still a part of us. And just, I think it's part of that. And just to also make a shout out to the East Point Peace Academy. They do Kingian Nonviolence training. So it's similar kind of, similar type of de-escalation, but very much rooted in the vein of social movement building. So that could be another resource to kind of, help kind of contend with some of these questions I think is so critical and timely right now. And so I do want to, I just want to see if anyone else.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah.
Like Leslie, I am also a lefty progressive. I don't have mediator training though. I wish I did. What I was hearing you say sounded like the things that we've, as lefty progressives, have been trying to grapple with, things like institutional racism and the patriarchy and internalized capitalism, all these things become triggers for people on the other side of the political divide. So how do you have a conversation with somebody who has taken the things that you have decided are important, and when I say you, I mean me, and has decided that those are weaponized words? How do we talk through that?
That's a really, I think that's a really good point. I think a lot of times, like, language around nonviolence and nonviolent communication does get weaponized. And so I think about it in terms of, going back to origins, think about Indigenous practices of what it means to reclaim our own voices and our own true selves. And, part of that is healthy boundaries, and part of it is just holding complexity and recognizing that, there's not always gonna, just really going, like, thinking about what are the motives underneath and what are some of the deeper layers, and getting back to always using a needs-based analysis. So we're gonna actually talk a little bit more about that. So I do want to move on, and I hope that I respond to some of what you're speaking to, and if not, please let me know. But so we're gonna keep it moving. So wanted to just kind of share the oppression tree as a visual for folks, and want to also give you some time, like right now, to really think about so there's this quote that I really love from Assata Shakur. She says, "People get used to anything. Unless you think about oppression, the more your tolerance for it grows. After a while, people just think oppression is the normal state of things, but to become free, you have to be acutely aware of being a slave." And so I want you all to think about, what is that quote when you read that? What resonates for you? What do you think that she meant by that? And then also, what are some hot buttons, like some things that get you activated? So think about, how do structures of oppression impact your daily experiences, for better or worse? And so that could be, oppression that you personally experience, or oppression that you see in the world that gets you really upset or triggered. And then what's the significance of being aware of your triggers, right? Think about it. So if you're somebody who, and also just to say that this work is intersectional. So we all experience oppression, whether we're on the receiving end or giving end. We all experience oppression by nature of being human. It's part of our just natural experience. We also have tools for resiliency, because, obviously we're all here, we're together, right? We're safe in this moment. So there's that. There's always a flip side. And if you're somebody who, if you identify with a particular type of oppression, if you feel like, I am a woman of color and my racial identity is so important and significant to me, I want to push you in this activity or exercise to really think about, what are some other types of oppression that maybe you don't often think about or consider as much. So maybe, thinking about different, just like gender expressions or experiences of oppression, or thinking about different class privileges. whatever it is, right? For better or worse, how do structures, not necessarily how do they impact you, but just in general, how do structures of oppression impact your daily experiences for better or worse? So yeah, take a second, reflect on the quote, think about that piece of just structural oppression and injustice, and what might be the significance of being aware of our triggers. I'm gonna give also just maybe like 5 minutes. If you wanna turn your cameras off and just kind of go in a little bit, feel free to do that. And then we'll come back in just a little bit here. Okay, thank you all for taking that moment. I'm gonna ask folks to come back to our whole group here. If you feel comfortable and are able to, please turn your cameras back on so we can see your lovely faces. Everyone in our community today, thank you. Awesome. So I just want to take yeah, a little bit of time and have folks check in and see kind of what was that like for you, and any, you know, takeaways that you had or anything that you reflected on that you want to share back from that time.
Kenya, is your hand raised?
Is there a hand? And so think about, was it, yeah, did that feel difficult? Was that easy? Did you feel like there was a particular place that you wanted to go with that? Or was there anything that came up that maybe surprised you as you were thinking about this prompt?
Real quick, just because Jenny can only participate through the chat, let me read out hers first. I've been ignored and dismissed all my life because I was young, because I was a woman, and now because I am old. That is my biggest trigger, and has been a major effort to keep trying to speak up, and that is all I can do, keep trying to speak up.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you, Jenny. And then I think I did see a hand. Yeah, Greta, thank you. Oh, I think you're muted. There you go.
Hi, I'm Geeta, and thank you for this. I saw Jenny's comment, and I was emboldened to speak out as well, because that's exactly what I wrote. Is my hot button is being dismissed when I'm bringing up, especially when luckily I'm from a culture where women speak out and they argue, and so I've learned how to deal with myself in that situation, and I speak out. But my pet peeve is seeing others being dismissed and disrespected and not having them be able to use any tools to defend themselves. So I can't stand when that happens in front of me, and I often just jump out to defend others before I defend myself even. And I also notice microaggressions. I notice when people are feeling things when other people aren't noticing that. So it's good for me to know that that triggers me. And I often, what I do is I try to bring clarification that I feel like one or both parties are missing, to try and engage in a more constructive dialogue. But that is definitely a trigger, and I don't know, you know, whether these things. Yeah, I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, does that feel complete for now?
Yeah.
You feel good? Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate you just taking that moment to notice that and what was coming up for you, and noticing some of your tendencies. And you spoke to us a little bit, but I'm curious, yeah, if anyone else wants to add kind of what is the significance of noticing, like what are the things that activate us, or why might it be important to reflect on some of this stuff? And there's no, I mean, hopefully it goes without saying, but you know, there's no right or wrong answer with any of this stuff. It's all messy. We're all just kind of figuring out as we go.
So can I just say one other thing I was struggling with is sometimes I've been told in these kinds of situations where people are actually very much focused on trying to be more self-aware or create movements where there's more awareness around these things, that speaking for others is not always good. And so it's been a challenge to know how to speak for others, and not be misconstrued as I'm just trying to speak for myself, but using others. So there's this delicate balance that I'm not quite sure how to deal with yet, but where people are like, well, you should just speak for yourself. And there's this, this thing of speak out for community, but focus on how you're feeling and speak for yourself in that situation. And so I'm trying to figure out, how do I speak for myself about my own anxiety about what I'm seeing, rather than trying to always just come in and speak for others who can't speak for themselves, because there is a delicate balance in there. And I understand that that's a valuable thing to distinguish.
It absolutely is a really delicate balance. And yeah, I just appreciate you naming that. And I think it's important to just have that awareness and keep cultivating that, so we can, be in solidarity and really support each other without appropriating or extracting from other people's experiences and taking away from, but actually adding to and contributing to in a way that's truly helpful at the end of the day. And it's not easy, right? Like it's messy, and there's going to be multiple truths and multiple perspectives in every moment. And just, I think, mindfulness, that awareness is so important. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So we're gonna, just keep it moving. And one of the things that, part of the reason I was thinking about this activity is I wanted to kind of introduce the role of the trauma triangle. Has anyone seen this visual before?
Yes.
Yeah, someone said yes. Awesome.
Yes.
So I've noticed this to be a really helpful visual and framework. So kind of the idea is, when we're in trauma or when we're feeling activated, oftentimes we default to self-identifying. It's just a human thing. Whenever we're stressed out, we go in and we self-identify. And so some of the kind of typical ways that people identify when they are experiencing trauma is either as a victim, a rescuer, or a persecutor. And so the victim, I want us to think about, like, what are our tendencies? Because when we're in it, right, like when we're experiencing trauma and when we're in conflict, we're not always noticing how we're showing up or noticing what our tendencies are. And so sometimes it's helpful to just zoom out and really think about, okay, which way am I leaning? So the victim is an individual, a person who experiences a lot of oppression. Something is always happening to them. They can't help themselves. They need either the rescuer or persecutor, the judge. Like, they need to feel harm, and they need to feel like somebody's going to come and help them. And they're always going to be kind of identifying with victimhood. And then the rescuer, similarly, right? This is a person who's the savior, the helper. You might have the best of intentions. You really want to come in. You want to affirm your own goodness. You need to save the victim. And in order for somebody to be victimized, there needs to be a judge or a persecutor, somebody inflicting harm, for you to be able to come in and be the rescuer. So you're dependent on these two as well. And then the bottom, the persecutor, right? So that's the person that's inflicting harm. So in order for you to inflict harm on another person, to persecute somebody, you need to have a victim in order to have power over them. And also you need to be able to, to have somebody like the rescuer to be able to not make it so easy, like some resistance against the oppression, to have somebody to kind of affirm that you're having power over this victim, to kind of bear witness to what's happening. And so you're also kind of dependent on the victim and rescuer. And so one of these can't really function without the other. And it's similar kind of idea of putting into context and really thinking about how, they're all actually, it seems like when we're experiencing conflict, we might kind of switch. We often bounce back and forth between one role or the other, but they're all connected ultimately. And we can't have one without the other. And we need to really think about what is the full, in every moment, we always have all three of these going on. Right, so within us, we have the full broad range of human experiences and emotions. We all have our internalized persecutor. We all have the helper, the rescuer, and we all have experiences of being victimized. That's all true all the time. And so it's not like one or the other, but it's both and kind of thing. So it's all of it. And so I want you to think about, experiences of oppression and experiences of trauma, because I want to kind of get away from this idea that oppression is something that's like really negative, that's keeping people in trauma mode, but recognizing that by identifying what your experiences of trauma and oppression are, you can actually, you know, engage more with your rescuer, with the persecutor, with the victim, with all of it. And so really kind of just getting in touch with the interconnected nature, and again, expanding our awareness around how we hold conflict. So yeah, it's just kind of another visual that I think is an interesting framework. And there's, I could share some of the resources of where that comes from, but just to pause, is there anything that is coming up for folks around that, the trauma triangle? I think someone mentioned they had seen it before. Was it a similar kind of introduction? Yeah, is it Jeff? Yeah, do you want to say something about it?
I saw it probably 15 years ago. It was about family dynamics type of stuff, and it was really, really kind of struck home because you kind of think about it and where am I in each of those places? Like, how does each of those live within me? Mm-hmm. And it can shift a viewpoint to hold all those. It might not be fun to hold all those and see those in myself, but then also see the dynamics within organizations as well.
Yeah, it's true. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, is there anything else that that came up for folks when we were looking at it and talking about it just now? It's hard. It's really hard when you know, when you're in it and you feel like you so strongly identify with one or the other, to really recognize that, oh, actually, like, I am vulnerable. I do have my shadow side, and I can't help myself, and I have experienced harm, and all these things can exist at once, and that's okay. Yeah, Philip.
It seems like if I'm thinking of myself as the victim and then I push back, then I become the persecutor.
Yeah, so again, finding, right, like we were speaking of earlier, just finding that balance. So a lot of times we go to the extremes. It's like, oh, you will overcompensate. So if you feel victimized, then we go to like attacking other people because I'm a victim. You don't understand, I have to defend myself, or vice versa. And we'll kind of like ping pong back and forth. And, you know, it's really just coming back to center. So much of this work of de-escalation is just always coming back to center, finding that balance, whatever that means for you. So we're gonna do a little bit more interactive activity. We're gonna partner you all up, but want to see if folks feel ready. We're probably just gonna take a quick break here for a moment. Maybe just take, you know, 4 or 5 couple minutes. And how are we feeling in this moment so far? I just want to give you all another, again, opportunity to check in with yourselves. If you have, we were playing with the computers earlier, if you have the ability to drop an emoji in the chat, feel free to do that so you could track, you know, where folks are at. Or just take a second and, you know, check in with yourself, or you could put in the chat kind of what feelings are coming up for you so far in this moment. Scale of 1 to 10, you know, 10 being the best. Do you feel like, you know, you're getting what your intentions were for the workshop? Or is there anything else that you're hoping to address that, then maybe we might get to later? So this is a chance where we're gonna, you know, we're gonna have a little bit more practice, and it's gonna be a little bit more hands-on. And so we're gonna do a little active listening activity, and I wanna just share that the purpose of de-escalation is really just to slow down enough to allow the spirit of the conflict to emerge and be recognized. And so oftentimes when we're in conflict, it's, you know, I think about conflict as its own individual entity. So it's something that's between us. So it's me, it's you, and then there's like conflict between us. And so de-escalation is about allowing the it, right, the spirit or whatever it is, the tension that's between us, to kind of not have it between us, but to have it to something out there, right? Something separate, something that's not, it's still there, like it could be its own entity, the spirit is still there, but it's no longer, it's not going to be between us anymore. And something that we're both looking at together from the same perspective. And I'm going to invite you all to think of another conflict that you've experienced, either recently or, you know, from earlier in your lives. But want to also share before we do that, that oftentimes in the Western world in general, there's kind of an overemphasis on the spoken word. And there's a lot of, we're talking about how sometimes folks will weaponize these tools of transformative, restorative justice, mediation, whatever it is, nonviolent communication. And really wanting to think about what does it mean to get back to center, right? To reclaim these practices for ourselves and think about how we could slow down enough to be present to what's organically unfolding. And so I think about that in terms of reclaiming our own intuition. It might not be a conversation. It might not be a verbal dialogue. When we think about mediation or think about de-escalation, oftentimes we think about a verbal dialogue. There's emphasis on dialogue. And just want to offer that words aren't always necessary in conflict resolution or reconciliation. So just, want to offer that as well, plant that seed. And then for this next activity, I'm going to ask you all to think about a conflict that you'd feel comfortable sharing with a partner, just like you did before. Not something like super activating, right? That feels like enough of a challenge or stretch. And you're going to take and sharing with each other. So 2 to 3 minutes each. So maybe 2 minutes, one partner is going to share. Sarah will cue you all to switch when it's time. And then you're going to have the other person share back. And so kind of the main thing I want you to focus on is while your partner is sharing, really practice listening fully, right? With no response or reaction. So it's kind of like a fun theater activity. Really, like, you could go as deep with this as you want, but really try, like, within your facial expressions in the most subtle ways, like see if you could have zero response whatsoever without moving any body parts, without speaking anything out loud, just completely equanimous and just bearing witness to and listening to what your partner is saying during in the moment. So before Sarah's gonna break us out into pairs in just a minute, and I think we're an odd number, so I'm probably gonna join a pair as well. But do we all understand the instructions? Yeah? Okay, cool. Hello, everybody, welcome back. Awesome. Okay, so yeah, just want to take a moment and just pause here, and I'm curious to hear from folks how. Yeah, so Jenny says not enough time in the small group, but okay, I got my say in earlier in the chat. So we could have gone, and we are going to do a similar exercise. We're going to have more time to pair up. So I apologize. I know I didn't give y'all a lot of time, but it's just to kind of get like a taste of what that was like. So want to, hear back from folks actually what was that like? I know it wasn't enough time, but what was the experience for, well, let's hear first from the people who shared out your conflict. What did that feel like? Yeah, Philip.
Yes, I was referring to a conversation that I had yesterday with my brother-in-law about the election. And basically, the conversation did not go well, but what might have worked better would be to, ask them, it's like, well, it seems we have differing points of view, and is there a way for us to be able to talk about this, and like get to some kind of resolution that would, that would be useful to you.
And what did it feel like to share that with your partner right now in the breakout groups?
Oh, it was in other words, having a way out of this, because this comes up a lot, is helpful, because otherwise, it's kind of like we're just butting heads.
So it was helpful to be able to talk about it?
Yes.
Great, I'm so glad. Is there anyone else that that shared with your partner, that wants to share about your that wants to reflect on what it was like to be the person to share about the conflict? Yeah, Danny.
Oh, I was going to speak on how it felt to listen. without responding.
I'm gonna come, yeah.
My bad, okay.
No worries. I just want to see, yeah, if there's anyone else that wanted to, did it feel vulnerable to share about being in conflict, or did it feel, yeah, helpful to, did it feel supportive to have somebody listen?
Yes, yes. I was actually struggling to find like what I wanted to say, but then when I shared, it was uneasy, but I feel better having shared it because it's a conflict that I've been avoiding and not engaging for some reason. And so saying it out loud, I still feel uneasy and a little bit tense, but it feels better to have shared it. It feels like a little bit of a release that maybe I'm in a better place to confront it a little bit.
Thank you. And I think Jeff was, yeah, thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, I noticed that for me, it was a little bit unnerving when my partner had no facial reactions or anything like that, any kind of response to what I was saying. I've done this exercise before, and I've had a similar experience. I think I'm accustomed to just having a natural response on the part of the listener, even if it's not something that they're doing intentionally as a way of holding space. That's even more helpful, of course, because there's something that gets communicated, something around sort of validation or acceptance or kind of welcoming of what I'm sharing that I can detect from just facial expressions. So yeah, I'm not sure kind of what the purpose of having them not give any response at all. But I noticed that it's definitely not, for me, it wasn't conducive to building rapport and sort of facilitating.
Yeah, and so, well, I'm gonna actually get back to that, but I want to see if anybody yeah, what did it feel like to hear from folks about what did it feel like to not respond to the person that was sharing? Yeah, Kit.
It actually felt distracting for me in some ways because I had to focus so hard on, no, don't make a facial expression. No, don't nod. Don't laugh. Don't agree. Don't like let anything about your reaction be visible. That in some ways that was distracting from what I was taking in. And but I'm also now recognizing that like in some ways I still have the reactions that I wanted to have in my mind, so I still have like anchors to the story. But
yeah, thank you for saying that. I think that's a really interesting part of active listening. And just to share, yeah, so I mean, really kind of my intention with this activity was to give folks a chance to notice like what are your tendencies. So when you are completely blank, you kind of you know, your mind fills in the gaps, so you start to notice like, oh, actually I did want to speak out, or maybe, you know, for some people it is more comfortable to not be as responsive, and it takes the pressure off to just kind of be disengaged in that way. And so really just thinking about, yeah, and so Gita says not responding was the toughest part. And so it's going to be, you know, it's going to vary depending on people's different styles and different personalities at the end of the day, but just to give folks a chance to notice like actually what are your tendencies. And so if it's something that, you know, if somebody is needing something very particular from you, to notice like what areas you're going to have to hone in on to really work to respond to them appropriately. And so we're going to go to, yeah, so we're going to go to the next slide, unless actually I'm going to pause. Did anyone have any questions about that kind of activity? Or, yeah, Gita.
Sorry. Yeah, I was wondering, what is the purpose of not responding?
I mean, so I think a lot of times, and I'll say, I think this is my tendency, so I can speak to this, and if anyone else wants to, feel free to jump in. But I know that a lot of times if somebody's in conflict, and I think I heard folks share earlier as well, that kind of there's a tendency to want to help and to jump in. And sometimes, you know, folks don't often want help because it puts them in a victim role. And so instead of coming in to rescue the person and playing that, really just bearing witness, right? The art of bearing witness and saying, I see you. I hear you, like you're whole, you don't need, there's nothing I need to do, you're okay, you're having an experience, I understand you're feeling this, and that's okay. And just having that physical and energetic validation can feel supportive. And so I appreciate, like, I'm glad, you know, that for some folks it seemed like it was supportive just to be able to share and talk through what they needed to without the dialogue, right? It doesn't always have to be a dialogue. It can be, and that's fine too. But just to share that, yeah, sometimes, you know, there's different ways that we could help and support each other.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and so kind of goes to this next, so this next slide, right? So what is your tendency with responding to conflict? And so this is another really helpful visual for me, and we'll, you know, send out other resources later. But it's kind of a spectrum. So thinking about, you know, when you're responding to somebody you're supporting in conflict, is your tendency to be more controlling? Do you want to be in charge and kind of jump in there? Are you kind of more on the encouragement, nurturing side, more supportive, or you know, more authoritative, kind of, or it could be a mix of both. Sometimes we jump back and forth. But the scale kind of goes from low to high. And so somebody who is not super supportive or not really taking a lot of controlling or not setting boundaries could be really, this is the not box. It's a really neglectful approach. And so, you know, sometimes with parenting is a really great example to use. Talking about conflict, I don't have children of my own, but thinking about just child rearing, right? Like my background was in education. I think a lot about youth development. If there's a child that needs a lot of support or is really just emotionally needy, you know, you might not get triggered by them. You might not set boundaries because you feel like, oh, you don't want to upset them. And so you might just take like a more kind of passive approach, but that's actually not supportive to them either, right? It's still low support. By not setting boundaries and not supporting them, you're basically just ignoring them, and that's not going to be super helpful, for lack of a better word. Or, right, sometimes you'll see like teachers or parents who maybe they're like, oh, but I care about my kids so much, I don't want them to get hurt. Maybe this is more of the rescuer approach. And so you set a lot of boundaries, you're super disciplined, like really hard on them, like the idea of like tough love. It could be a little authoritative or punitive, where it's, you know, you're doing something to them, where it's like, you know, or like the example of, right, like hitting the kids, God forbid, but, right, it's like, well, I'm hitting them for their good. I'm doing this to them, but it's for their own good. And so that's an approach, but it could be really authoritarian and very punitive. And then kind of the other extreme of that is the for box. So doing things for people. So again, the rescuer, it could be really like paternalistic or permissive. So really being super supportive and like not wanting to hurt anybody, not giving folks a lot of freedom, right? Best of intentions, don't want to set limits, don't want to discipline them. You want to just like give them all the space that they need and just be the shoulder to cry on. But it's not, it could keep folks stuck in that victimhood again. So you're doing something for them because they can't take care of themselves. So you want to come in and be the savior and do this for them. And again, right, best of intentions, but not always the most helpful or restorative. The idea is to get out of that trauma victim triangle and recognizing folks' full humanity. And so when we could work with folks and strike that balance of being, right, setting boundaries, creating that container, and also being supportive at the same time, kind of the like warm demander, we could be restorative. And that's where conflict and relationships, where the healing, where the magic actually happens. And it's not like this is a box, multiple boxes, lots of boxes here today, right? But it's messy. It's never that clean cut. In any moment, we could jump from being more authoritarian or more kind of permissive or neglectful. But the intention is to always be with people. So recognizing we don't need to fix anything, but really just bearing witness and being with someone in conflict can be really powerful, restorative healing approach. So just wanted to offer that, visual as well, and to hear, you know, how does that resonate for folks to see that, if we could go back, like how does it resonate with folks to kind of think about working with folks in conflict instead of, you know, acting out or just being conflict avoidant or, like feeling like you need to be savior. Or I guess another question I'd have is this visual like helpful when you're doing the listening activity? And again, no, it was super short. but thinking about some of your tendencies around how you engage with conflict. So Jenny says, can you say more about the neglectful corner? So that's basically where you, yeah, so that's like if your tendency is to be conflict avoidant, you might, you know, and again, it's messy. So it might be a situation where it doesn't make sense to engage and you want to disengage for psychic boundaries and just for your own safety. But if you're neglectful, you're not engaging with the conflict. You're taking a completely passive stand. So you're not attacking a person, right? You're not like lashing out and attacking them, but you're also not creating a container. You're not creating an opening. You're not doing anything to address the conflict. You're just kind of ignoring it. You're being neglectful, like, I'm not going to deal with it. It's not there. And just kind of avoiding it, right? There might be tension, but you're just not going to deal with it. You're just going to avoid it.
You don't have many examples of restorative.
We don't. Who? I'm sorry. Who was it that just said that? I'm trying to.
Carol.
Carol, thank you. Yeah. Do you want to say more about that?
When I was teaching at San Quentin, I was trying to create examples, and it was hard because there weren't many to look to.
Yeah. I mean, and I think, you know, restorative justice is a field for yeah, there's a lot we could say about that. I think it's a fairly new approach in some ways, because a lot of, like, if you look at our systems, like even, right, I was talking earlier about the school to prison pipeline, it's our legal systems, it's really punitive. So child acts out, there's like direct consequences. They go through the system. There's this, you know, criminalization that happens where folks are put through this punitive system, and there's not a lot of agency or not a lot of support in terms of actually working with individuals, the people that need the help the most, right? There might be opportunities for welfare, like you could get some assistance, or you could get, or the other end of that is you criminalize, or you could end up in the system or get, you know, arrested, whatever it is. But to actually create systems where we have alternatives, where folks can reach out for support, and we're working with individuals in direct need and kind of walking them through what are their underlying needs is really, yeah, I think it's a really important tall order. And I agree, there aren't that many examples. And before we move on, I do want to share, for me, that's particularly exciting because that means that there's also lots of opportunities to practice. So always opportunities. And so Jenny says, trying to find the voice to move out of just empathizing to actually having something authoritative to say. Yeah, and I think especially, you know, for women, I think this is like really gendered also, and there's, again, going back to our social conditioning, certain social identity or people with certain social markers are going to be conditioned to respond differently to conflict. And so think about, like, how has your personal social conditioning conditioned you to respond to conflict? Maybe you are more soft-spoken, or maybe you are more authoritative. And do you feel comfortable with that? Maybe you do, or maybe that's something you want to work on. But always thinking about, right, like, how can we be with each other in right relationship based on our different orientations to this work? So we're just gonna, keep it moving, and want to offer to say that, you know, so much of, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, so much of trying to figure out how to be with each other is really figuring out actually what are people needing. It's one of those things where we all, like, nobody wants to be in conflict. Humans don't want to be in conflict with each other. We love each other. Sometimes we forget because, you know, we have hard feelings, and that's part of the human experience because we're not getting our needs met. But as soon as we go down to, right, it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when we get our fundamental needs met, we are able to actually, like, love and care for each other and be in our full human experience. But we oftentimes, again, we think about conflict on a very surface level, like that example Danny gave earlier in the store, right? All of this stuff was happening under the surface that was just never spoken about. But if we try to understand individual experiences of harm, it's important to consider what are their behaviors, feelings, thoughts, values, and also, again, underlying needs, so important. Anytime we're doing de-escalation or mediation work, we always want to use a needs-based analysis. And so one of the things that happens is there's assumptions about what folks are needing, right? So if you're the rescuer, you might be like, oh, this person is cranky, they haven't eaten yet, they need food. And that might help, but actually maybe that's not their underlying need. Maybe they haven't eaten because there's something else that they're needing that, you know, they haven't gotten a chance to have access to yet. And so we want to figure out how, okay, so then how do we get to underlying needs, right? And so behavior could be, so there's some examples, and I'm gonna pause and see if, yeah, someone wants to volunteer to actually read these out loud. Not all at once. Thank you, Leslie.
Root causes of conflict. When trying to understand an individual's experiences of harm, we want to consider their behavior, feelings, thoughts, values, and underlying needs. You want me to read the
Yeah, thank you.
offender too? Saying yes, even if I mean no. That's the behavior level. Frustration with myself, anger with others, feelings. I couldn't cave in. I shouldn't cave in. I am weak. They shouldn't be asking me. They are taking advantage of me. Thoughts. Harmony, helpfulness, values. To belong, to be loved, security, predictability, meaning, significance, needs.
So a lot of times we'll confuse people's behaviors with their feelings, their thoughts, and their needs, and just want to mention and really tease apart and discern that those are different things. And so how do we get to underlying needs? There's lots of different ways to do this. And I'm going to go to the next slide and kind of, here's just some examples and some tools that we could use. And I was trying to get creative and think about an acronym that would work. So, you know, if you get stuck, think of it as reverse. So when you assume you know where someone's coming from and you don't actually know what their underlying needs are, pause and reverse, right? So RVRSER. Grammar is a funny thing. I'll leave it at that. But yeah, so reverse. So first thing is reflect. We want to reflect somebody's feelings back to them. For validate, does somebody want to read that out loud?
I'll do it.
Thank you.
Clarifying needs. Reflect the feelings. Validate. Acknowledge all feelings, values, and efforts as meaningful. Restate. Paraphrase basic ideas and facts. Summarize. Restate important concerns and emotions. Encourage. Invite the speaker to talk about a specific subject. And reframe. When speakers express themselves in divisive terms, restate their message using more inclusive terms.
Yeah, so really just, you know, affirming people's experiences and just gently bringing them back to what is it that's their core values. And then oftentimes I'll kind of guess to like, what is it that they're actually needing, right? Underneath the feelings, underneath the emotions and what we're like physically or verbally seeing and hearing, what is it that they're needing? What's underneath all of that? And so these are just some tools, again, that you could apply. And we're going to get a chance to practice in just a second, but also want to go to the next slide and consider some kind of roadblocks, because it seems like simple enough, right? But what happens is we oftentimes get ourselves in trouble because we're like, oh yeah, depending again on our orientations to this work and what our personal tendencies are, we might default to providing solutions, analyzing, lecturing, interrogating, right? Asking yes, no questions and judging. So there's this tendency to like put people in a box and keep it kind of contained, and then we get stuck in that. And so people, like, we might inadvertently put somebody in a victim role without realizing it, or putting somebody in a persecutor role without appreciating their good intentions. There's so many different ways that we could do this, subconsciously and consciously. And, you know, it's fine, there might be a reason for it, but if you want to get to better communication, these are some signs that we want to look out for. So we want to kind of keep communication open so that folks feel like there's room for their experiences, for them to share, for them to be able to breathe into this, you know, spirit of what's really happening for them. So I'm going to ask somebody to read these out as well.
I can read them.
Thank you.
So roadblocks to communication. Hindrances to de-escalation can include providing solutions like, well, have you tried? Analyzing. It seems to me that. Lecturing. You know, you shouldn't have. Interrogating. Who? What? Why did you? Asking yes/no questions. Did you do? Judging. You should have.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's really subtle, right? It could seem like these questions, oftentimes I do this all the time, I ask these questions subconsciously without even realizing it. I think I'm being really supportive, especially if it's somebody that we care about, if we want to take care of them. You know, it's hard, it could be hard to not give advice. But the more, again, going like, and there might be a place to give advice, but it could be a hindrance to de-escalation. And so the more we could think about, like going back to that previous slide and really focusing on, okay, how do we stop, reverse, thinking about what does this person actually need? So the more we could just reflect, validate, restate, summarize, encourage, and holding space for their experience and taking our piece out of it, the more they're going to be able to open up. So, okay, Leslie, thank you for letting us know you're going to need to bow out. And then I heard Jenny say, there's something before that. Okay, sorry, I think I missed a message. Yeah, so I wanted to offer those slides to y'all because we're going to get back into our pairs in just a second. And same story that you shared earlier, you're just going to share back with, but this time with more detail. A different partner, same story, more detail. And this time the partner who is listening, try to see if you could use some of the, some of the topics that we just went over for effective communication, to see if you could provide support for the partner that just shared without, right, like judging, analyzing, or giving advice, but really seeing if they could open up, and if you could assess what were their underlying needs in that situation. Okay, so again, disclaimer, I know that was not nearly enough time, but it's just kind of a little taste to get a sense of what, what this work could feel like. And so I'd love to hear from you all. What was that experience like this round compared to the first time, actually, practicing giving supportive feedback without defaulting to judgment or advice or some of those other questions? I saw a thumbs up. Yeah, Jeff's nodding his head. Awesome, thank you. Kids nodding their head, thank you. Does anyone want to share about what came up, or what was that experience like this time?
I think it was more valuable to have the straight listening the first time and the feedback on the second round.
Do you want to, say more about that?
We both caught ourselves trying to give feedback at the end of our first round. We weren't so much, I wasn't so much aware of it being on the receiving end, but I was aware of it fighting myself on the giving end. And so, then the second time, it felt natural, but it was good. It was good, I think, to have the listening first, because a lot of times we don't have a chance to get really heard. And if you are really heard, a lot of times you can monitor yourself.
Thank you so much for saying that. So much. Yeah, that's our next piece. Just we're going to close here in a bit, but wanted to say so much of this work really is just about, again, coming back to center and self-regulation and self-monitoring. And it's true, when we're not heard, it's a lot harder, right? It's almost impossible to do that. And so when somebody is in conflict, it's so important that they're able to express themselves and be heard in a way where there's room for their full experience. And just before we move on and talk a little bit more about self-regulation, is there anyone that wants to share about, what was it like to practice staying away from some of the roadblocks? Was it hard to not ask them to, like, yes, no questions, or is there anything in particular on that list that was more tricky than others? Yeah, Jeff.
As an educator, tend to give advice, so I have to stay away from giving advice.
Thank you for your honesty. I appreciate it. And yeah, like I said, my background's in education as well. So I feel that I think it's a really common thing. A lot of us, right? We feel like, and it comes from a good place of wanting to support. But again, like recognizing that everybody has their own agencies and abilities to care for themselves, but making space for them to just be heard and blossom into their full selves. So important. And it's hard. And I really like genuinely appreciate your honesty, because it's hard to acknowledge that when we want to care for folks, that maybe we're not always showing up in ways that is really getting to their underlying needs or really supporting them in ways that they want to be supported, right? And so
right.
It takes
it can, as you know, like it can maybe keep them in a victim role as opposed to empowering them, like saying, I know you've got it in you, like help them bring it forth, but that's different.
100%. Or sometimes, right, the opposite is it could keep them in a persecutor role of, oh, well, this person is the antagonist, they need accountability, without recognizing that, oh, actually, like they're having their own experience in this conflict. There's room for all of it and more. We're greater than the sum of our parts. So important to remember. So we just have a little bit of time here, and wanted to, if we could go to the next slide, I wanted to talk about this piece around self-regulation, because so important in this work to really think about, so really think about and notice, like, how do we self-regulate? Like, what are some self-care practices that we have to notice when we're holding and when we're releasing? If we're talking to somebody, do we notice it in our body? Are we getting tight somewhere? Do we feel anxious? Are we too relaxed? Are we too avoidant, or just like not engaged enough, right? With maybe some of the deeper issues at play. And self-care practices are going to look for everyone. There's no right or wrong way to do self-care. It's whatever works for you, right? For the sake of self-preservation. But one thing I do want to say about self-regulation is that a lot of times there's a tendency to conflate self-regulation and de-escalation. And I really want to discern the two. I think it's an important discernment. So a lot of times if we're in conflict, we want to jump in there and de-escalate a conflict before we've gotten a chance to self-regulate. Self-regulation is not about mediation. It's not about engaging conflict, solving anything. It's just about your own personal internal self-regulation. So this is where you go back to center, find your own experience. Is your heart beating really quickly? Are your palms sweaty? What are you experiencing? What's coming up for you? And as soon as you start to notice those factors, the more you're able to, right, come back to like a more grounded place and self-regulate. The more you have that awareness to come back to center. And then we could de-escalate and start, right, giving supportive, clarifying questions and engaging in ways that are going to be helpful. But we have to make sure that we are coming from a grounded enough place first. And so, and actually, if we go back to the previous slide, I just want to name briefly, it's really important. So we want to find our stretch zone. So when we're thinking about self-regulation or de-escalation, we want to figure out how, we don't want to be in panic, right? This is another really helpful visual for me. So there's 3 different zones. There's a comfort zone, stretch zone, panic zone. The one in red is panic. So if we're in conflict, we might feel overwhelmed, stressed out, everything's overwhelming. Comfort zone is conflict avoidant. We're anxiety free. We're super grounded. We're just like in our Zen place. This is disengagement. This is panic. We really want to be in stretch. So it's not like, forget about it, I don't want to deal, or this is so overwhelming, but that like, okay, I could work with you. Finding your stretch. So learning and really figuring out from a grounded perspective, how could you move forward to engage with the other person in a way where you're going to be able to actually be effective and helpful. So don't conflate self-regulation and de-escalation. They're both really important. But make room, hold room for your own experiences and conflict so that you can engage with other people in right relationship. And that's going to shift over time. Like all of this work is dynamic. I keep reiterating it's messy, it's messy, it's messy. But I think the more that we can just use these tools and keep practicing, it starts to get easier and we keep building those muscles. So this was a super just like short condensed workshop. It was just real basic overview. But again, wanted to offer some different frameworks and tools and visuals to kind of help move forward with this. And we just have about 10 minutes, but wanted to open up just a really short, Q&A if there's anything that's coming up or any burning questions or last closing comments that folks wanted to share out to the whole group.
Could you explain again what the different zones are on the last visual?
Yeah, so we went over that pretty quickly, so we could go back to it. So it's thank you, Sarah. It's the comfort zone in the middle. So this is when we're at our center, right? We feel super comfortable. We don't have any anxiety. We feel confident. We feel secure. We feel grounded. We're comfortable. The stretch zone is we're taking a risk. We're vulnerable. This is where the growth happens in the stretch zone. It takes a certain amount of vulnerability and courage to have to engage, to be, maybe you feel a little bit nervous. Maybe you have some anxiety about confronting a friend. They're still a friend, so you feel comfortable enough to approach them, but you're not panicked. There's no threats of violence. You don't feel super fearful or stressed out because right, there's a history and relationship there. So that's all in the stretch zone. And then panic is when, there might actually be a threat of violence. You can't function. It's that like flight or flight kind of moment where it's like, okay, this is like do or die. I need to like sink or swim. You're overwhelmed. So it's too much emotion to even be effective or to be helpful or to do anything. So panic's not helpful because we could get stuck there. It's not going to move us forward. Comfort zone, it might be comfortable, but it's not going to actually move us forward. To be in conflict actually, and to move through conflict actually requires a certain level of just basic anxiety, but also vulnerability and courage. So really want to find the middle layer, like find the middle path and figure out kind of what is your middle path in order to keep moving forward in ways that are helpful and effective. Did that kind of help answer your question, Philip? Was it? Okay, cool, thank you. So is there anything, yeah, Kit?
So I guess my question is sort of almost like overlying all of this. We're talking about de-escalation, but I'm not feeling super clear about what that means or how it happens.
In my response to that, you might not appreciate this, but I'm gonna say I think that's perfectly fine. Because again, I mean, I could give you like a verbal response, right? But there's no cookie cutter, like right or wrong way to do this stuff. It's just finding what's your stretch, right? Like how are you caring for yourself in a way that's gonna feel helpful and sustainable? And that might even change over time. There's no, right? We're like kind of building the plane as we fly it sort of mentality.
Sima, could you say a little bit more about why you've had people center themselves so much as we've gone through this workshop? That might get at some of what Kit is thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, just really like thinking about self-care practices, right? So if we're thinking about de-escalation, we can't show up for other folks in conflict if we're not able to be grounded and centered in our own selves. So there might be a tendency to want to have to, right, to hold somebody accountable or to fix something. But a lot of conflict is not just always out there, but it's internal too. And the way that we're experiencing the spirit of the conflict, that is our like self-responsibility. Healing is about self-responsibility, and ultimately de-escalation is about healing. And so thinking about like, what are your self-care practices? How are you coming back to your center so that you could fully engage? Because if you're not fully in your, like grounded in your own full spectrum of humanity with all your messiness and your warts and all of your traumas and dramas, you could be in conversation with another person and try to be in dialogue. But if you're not showing up fully, that's a whole entire like multiple layers that are going to be missing from the from that process. And so the more that you could bring of your own full healed healthy self, the more there's going to be just opportunity to transform the experience for both of you. Because even if
sorry,
yeah,
I didn't want to cut you off.
No,
So I was thinking about like the trauma triangle that you shared, and like it seemed like these three common like places people go during trauma to express themselves, but I wanted to like, maybe was there like an idea of how like a direction that we want to move people towards, or like, oh, is it just like, there's the victim, the persecutor, and then the rescuer, and it's like, are we trying to nurture around these three roles that people may express during trauma, or is there or like for my own trauma, like would there be like a peacemaker, or like a role that's like ideal to play? Like, does that make sense? I'm sorry if I'm not like communicating well. It just seemed like the three roles were all kind of negative expressions of trauma, the way they were described, and I was wondering if like there was a way that we should be like cultivating, or like a positive expression of it, or something like that.
So yeah, thank you. That's actually a really great question. So I don't think, right, so I think the idea is to not view them or identify with them as kind of negative personality traits or like archetypes, but just to recognize that they're neutral. Like we have them, we all have them, and just accept them for what they are and kind of take the charge out of it more than anything, taking the charge out of it. And so not not identifying.
Right. Okay. That's helpful.
Yeah. Okay, good. I'm glad. Yeah. So just not, so not necessarily viewing it as positive or negative. Yeah, Jeff.
So as Jocelyn was bringing the question in, I had a picture of that triangle superimposed over the concentric circles, where the three not quite negative aspects are more in the panic mode. The people, I myself, might fall into those roles under stress, whereas if I can actually center myself, I go in towards a middle point. But to acknowledge that all of that's me, right? All of those things, and it just depends on my emotions and my training and where I might go with that. And that everybody else is also all of those things.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, Dan says, well put, Jeff. That's great. So, and I don't want to seem, discourage anyone and feeling like, oh, there's no answers. But just to say that, to offer some expansiveness, and that fact that there's room for all of that and more, right? Like we are greater than the sum of our parts. And so these are just a couple tools, and there's a lot more out there and ways to think through this stuff. And I'm also going to be sending out some more resources from this workshop of just different things that we've gone over, and also some additional resources and frameworks that folks could access if they'd like. So I want to, just take a second. We really just have a few minutes, but to give you all an opportunity to really reflect on while we're here, and kind of maybe even make a commitment to consider like, where are some places where we feel like we want to be practicing some of these tools. And it could be, personal, professional, family lives, wherever it is. Just if you want to either, drop in the chat, or just take a second to kind of go in and think about for yourself, how is this work going to be most effective and meaningful for you? If you would like to, if you'd like to share out to the whole group, some community accountability, we could all bear witness to your process. Jocelyn says relationships, friendships, and with my co-op neighbors. That resonates for me as well. Thank you, Jocelyn, for sharing and being vulnerable with us. That's great. Okay, so I think we're gonna do just a quick one-word checkout here in a minute. And Sigita says it's actually empowering to know that the main tool is to be aware of ourselves. Yeah, thank you. And wanted to see, Sarah, if you had any kind of closing stuff, just logistics that you wanted to share with us before we kind of do our official kind of one-word checkout.
It would just be to let you guys know that on Monday or Tuesday, watch your email for the slides, resources, and then also the recording of this presentation. And it'll be available online as well. And then if you feel like there's any feedback that you want to give, there'll be a short form where you could drop that, but no pressure. I know that folks don't always want to do another feedback form or survey, but it's there if there's anything that you want to share.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm gonna do one word closeout. I'll start us off and then I'll pass it to the person who's left on my screen, which will be different for everyone, but we'll just, make sure everyone gets a chance to get their voices in the room one last time. And then that'll be it. That'll be the end of our time together. And just want to say, yeah, thank you all so much. I know Zoom is not an ideal meeting space, but it does mean a lot that we're finding ways to come together right now. And I just really appreciate you all being here. So thank you. So my one word checkout will be rain. Because I was excited it rained yesterday. Oh, and I will pass it to, I'll pass it to Jocelyn.
My one word will be reflection, because this has been great for that, I think. So thank you. There's no one to my left, but I'll pass it to Jeff Melcher on my right.
Thank you, Jocelyn. I'm feeling hopeful, empowered. That's one word.
Yes.
Passing to Danny.
Hi, and I think my word is open. I think that'll be mine. Oh wait, who's to my right? Justin's already been. Sima, did you give a word already? You're immediately to my right. Let me keep going down. Ty is the next person.
I'm just going to say grounded, and I'm going to pass it down to Diane Dew.
Introspective is my word. And I'll pass it to Philip. Did you go yet?
I did not. Grateful, and I will pass it to Kit.
My word is empathetic, and I will pass it to Larissa.
I'm with Jeff. I'm feeling hopeful. I'm just looking out at all these faces of all these people who want to do better. Maybe we can do better together. I'll pass it to Carol.
Sorry. My word is awareness, and I'll pass it to Gupta.
Yeah, my word is light in both iterations, both in terms of weight and also sunlight that brings clarity. It's more than one word, I'm sorry.
Good. You want to pass it?
I think everybody's gone.
I'll just read what
Kit? Is Kit?
No, he went.
Okay.
I'll read what Jenny put in the chat, which is optimism. And then Ophelia that jumped off said weekend, exclamation point. And I'll share the word honesty.
Nice. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So much gratitude. I hope we continue to just keep finding ways to take good care of ourselves and be gentle with each other. So hope you enjoy the rest of your weekends, and yeah, see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.